Calypso in Canada, this conference on black music. We have on our panel crooner to my left, Dick Luchan, Kevin Padmore, King Cosmos, and Roger Gibb. And I'm supposed to be the interviewer. I want to start off by asking this question. What are some of the distinguishing characteristics of Calypso in Canada? What are some of the things that distinguish Canadian Calypso, if you want to call it that?
Can I put in my 2 cents? I think the answer to your question is still evolving. We're still a very young Calypso community when compared to the traditional centers of Calypso production, Trinidad and Tobago and the Eastern Caribbean. Here in Canada, the Calypso community has been evolving in the last 25 years or so, although there have been Calypso activity prior to that. But what makes it, I think, Canada or Toronto, I can speak about, I guess, in a bit more because I'm familiar with Toronto. Although your question is Canada, and that's a far larger picture than I could even attempt to get at. The distinguishing thing about the Calypso community here is its diversity. The fact that you have Calypsonians from Trinidad and Tobago, of course, from Guyana, from Barbados, from the Leeward and Windward Islands, even Jamaican Calypsonians. And I think if I'm in Barbados, I don't see that. I miss, 95% of the Calypsonians I would be exposed to would be Barbadian. And similarly in Trinidad, maybe a bit more diversity in Trinidad, but similarly the case in Trinidad. Here in Toronto, we have a unique situation where in one Calypso tent you have Calypsonians from Trinidad, Jamaica, Guyana, Barbados, and several other islands. So I think that in itself tells us something, and we should be paying more attention to that diversity and seeing how we can exploit, if exploit is the right word, but seeing how we can really take advantage of that unique characteristic of our Calypso community and make it work for us.
Mm-hmm. Any other one like to just add to that or endorse it? Briefly?
I think that you'd also have a lot of people who have Canadian-born influences, young people of Caribbean origins in the mix. And so, as Roger said, it's evolving. So we definitely have that. What also distinguishes us is that there are a lot of local issues, whether it be in Winnipeg, the Winnipeg Calypso competitions, Montreal or Toronto. There are a lot of issues that the artists, which are the voice of the people, sing about issues impacting on them. And that, to me, distinguishes as well.
Mm-hmm. Are there any obstacles, anything that prevents Calypso in, let us say Toronto, let's use Toronto. Any obstacles that prevent the Calypso from becoming much more of a character, gaining character in the city? What are some of the obstacles?
I'd like to jump in on that one. First, let me say thanks, Yvonne. I know you introduced us, but you didn't introduce yourself. Yvonne Bob Smith, professor at Ryerson University, is our interviewer today. Obstacles, where do we begin when we start to talk about obstacles? One of the most obvious is accessibility to a wider audience. The Calypsos are made available to the audiences through the media. And as everyone knows, in this country we have what is known as the mainstream media, and then we have community media and so on. Thank God for community media. But where the mainstream is concerned, it's as though we are like what I like to call the bastard child of music of black origins, in the sense that we're almost non-existent, except maybe around Caribana time, and even then, any kind of exposure we get in the mainstream is given rather grudgingly. So I think accessibility to a wider audience is one of the main obstacles that that Canadian Calypso faces. I don't know how my fellow panelists feel about that.
I believe there's a problem even on community radio with regards to Canadian calypsos. Cosmos talks about the mainstream. I don't think that in a lot of cases that community radio is much better. On a lot of shows, you still hear the majority of the music being played is from the Caribbean. So I think that we're behind the 8 ball with regards to the mainstream media, but we're also behind the 8 ball with regards to community radio as well.
I totally agree with that. I think that lip service is paid to local artists, even on community radio. And when you are in the studio, certainly attention is given to you and your song is played. The moment you walk out the door, it's right back to Trinidad. And it doesn't matter about the quality coming out of Trinidad. The fact that it's from Trinidad ensures that it will get played. You could have a superior song locally generated, but because it doesn't have the Trinidad origin on it, they will give you some audience, but the moment you leave, that's it, back to business as usual.
It leads me to ask the question then, we're talking about black music here, Conference on Black Music. What is the level of Calypso, of the contribution that Calypso is making to this quote-unquote black music? If Calypso is denied full blossoming to wider audiences, well, how do you look at your contribution as Calypsonians?
Well, maybe one of the things we should try to nail down is what we call Calypso. I know there might be a disagreement on this, but we should try to nail down what we call Calypso as opposed to what we call soca or party music and so on, because that I think is one of that presents an obstacle as well, since traditionally Calypso is not seen as a dance music as such, and now we have, this mix of identities at times. So are people listening to Calypso because they want to be enlightened on a topic, because they want to understand how some issues are being dealt with, or do they want to hear something that just makes them feel good and makes them, jump a little and party and so on? I think that maybe we have to sort of distinguish between the two, because I think we tend to use Calypso rather loosely now to mean, any variation of that music coming out of the Caribbean.
I just want to say one thing else, because Caribbean immigrants normally from the different islands all have come with their Calypso heroes, if you will, their loves, their Calypsonians, their idols. And we are judged on those standards. So there's a very difficult thing. If you look at the promoters and who they promote most of the people from the Caribbean. So we need forums like these. We need educational sessions. We need to educate the masses for people to come out and see the artists to truly develop. Because if you look at the history of some of those greats, when they were nobodies as well, they were given a try. And the loyalties are still tied to the island. So we are actually being judged by island standards, if you will. And you may have even people would say that we're being judged by Trinidad standards, if you want to come back to specific. And that's something that we have to move away from. And again, through education, I think that will break those ties, because we have to be, for them to come out and see us. And people say that without even visiting a tent or coming to a Calypso show, because, from their island, that's Calypso, and everything else is That's a kind of an attitude that is out there.
Well, that leads me to the question about calypso lyrics then. If we use calypso, meaning the songs that have been derived from work songs of the enslaved Africans way back in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, how do you see calypso, whatever is sung here in Toronto, as relating to life? Do you see it as an identification piece? Do you see it as relating to the effects that black music would have on the population as a whole? How do you see it? Do you see it living a life of its own then that you could refer to, you know, when we say, okay, Congo man, or we refer to bass man or whatever? Do you see calypso doing that, relating to the lives of the people in the diaspora?
If you take the institution of Caravana as an example of a cultural phenomena that has been taken from the Caribbean and transplanted to Canada to meet the needs of the black and Caribbean community here, if you look at calypso music in the same sort of way as a cultural phenomenon that has been taken from the Caribbean, where it is the mainstream music, it is the expression of the people in the Caribbean, it is the music of the people. But when you bring it and put it in the context here, our community here is not the mainstream. We are a very marginal, small minority community within the whole context of Canada, of the music industry. So the battle we are fighting and the whole issue of identity, of what we are doing and what's the purpose of what we are doing, becomes a big question. Do we simply just regurgitate what we have brought with us from the Caribbean and expect people to relate to it? Well, sure, the people in our community will understand it and relate to it. Or do we attempt to take the art form and transplant it freshly and make it adaptable and relevant to the new situation that it's now in? Personally, I feel that's the way to go, because that's the only way the art form will survive and be reborn in a new setting where it can actually either thrive or whatever. And that is where I feel one of the biggest challenges in the Calypso community to the writers and the Calypsonians. How do we make Calypso relevant to the wider community? It's one thing to say the wider community does not accept us, or we need more access to the wider community, but if we're singing about, you know, what is going on in Barbados or what is going on in Trinidad or Guyana, and the average audience really can't relate to what you are singing about, well, then you've kind of lost them along the way. It doesn't resonate in the Canadian context. And I feel if we're going to be successful with the music, Calypso music here, we have to find innovative ways to make Calypso resonate in the Canadian context and make it do what it did back in the Caribbean, but do it in a modern sense here in Canada.
I feel that I'm excited about this comment because it touches on personal experience. Many a time I've felt that Calypsonians here should do what the hip-hop artists are doing in the U.S. and here. That is, take on the quote-unquote establishment in a certain way. Create waves, kick some ass, kick some butt, you know. The personal experience for me is 1995 when, I don't know if any of you remember, this town, this city of Toronto was rife with, well, what is now being called racial profiling, but it's as though we had, from the mainstream media, I use that term again, a kind of targeting of young black men. And we had a particular writer for a particular newspaper, and now this is archival, so I don't think I should call names. But that particular writer, it's as though she was making her career on saying some of the vilest things about young black men in our community. And just about everywhere I went, I could hear people talk about this reporter, this newspaper. They call it a racist paper. And that somehow triggered in me a desire to respond. And I wrote a calypso in '95 called Christie. And that, it caused all hell to break loose. You had major radio stations, I think CFRB, for instance, devoted about 12 hours of airtime talking about that situation. That, to me, is one example of digging into the issues that affect us here and being as controversial as possible. But I think sometimes that is prevented because the bottom line is we want to get airplay. We want people to hear and to buy our product because it costs a lot of money to produce those products. So we caught now, if we go along that route, yes, it would stir up things quite a bit and we would get attention, but would we sell as many copies? You see, because it's as though the party people who support the industry, they want to dance. The older people who are the thinkers and so on, they would hardly go out and buy a CD. So, you know what I mean? That becomes a kind of obstacle as well. But I agree with Roger. We have to claim our space. We have to stake that claim and, be as controversial as possible. Get attention. That's the basic thing, really.
Thank you.
I think Cosmos has touched more than once on what I see as one of the main issues, one of the main obstacles, soca versus calypso. The promoters, the DJs, the people who buy the records, where the money is spent is definitely in soca. You don't have social commentary like he's talking about in soca. You don't have meaningful lyrics at all. It's jump and wave, show me your flag, put your hand on the ground, etc.
And the boom boom.
And that is unfortunately what is selling. And that is what fills the arenas. That's what the promoters go after. So songs like you mentioned, Congo Man, I doubt that it would become popular today. It would be suffocated by soca. Intelligent lyrics seem to have no place in current Caribbean music. And it's almost like we're fighting ourselves because we don't provide a stage for traditional calypso as such. If you can't dance to it, people don't play it, people don't buy it. You know what I'm saying? And the young people are the people who are buying the records and filling the halls. Traditional calypso is appealing more and more to an older, more established, conservative audience. And to write a song like Christie and get it played, if it doesn't have a soca beat, I wonder if it would be played today. Even within the last 5 years, soca has strangled traditional calypso, in my opinion, more and more. And it has the support of the powers that be. And that's one of the big problems I see with calypso.
I'm going to disagree with Cosmos and Crooner on one point. I think that it has a lot to do with, almost everything to do with topic and length. I'm a writer, I'm not a singer. I'm a writer, and I am one of those guilty parties. I wrote 2 songs, The Children of Africa, which is over 12 minutes long, and What About We, which is over 12 minutes long. As someone who is on the radio, along with my friend Mr. Alex Waith, no one wants to play a song that long. Absolutely no one, including me. I am never again going to write a song of that length. And I think that's, if we're looking at successes and failures, that's one of the things that we have to look at. The other thing is topic matter. I don't think that it is, of course, soca appeal to younger people. Older people want something that they can listen to and relate to. And I think that is our problem. One of the things that I found when I first came to the association were the topics. The fact that you had the best composition on a local topic, everyone wanted to do that because they think, well, I can't win the monarchy, but I can win this. instead of looking for something which was more appealing, more widely appealing, I remember the first year I came to the association, I met a performer. He had wrote a song called Mikey. I collaborated on that. We changed it. We called it Common Sense Revolution. On that song, we used it, and I would say that he earned more money with that song than the first three people in the competition.